Chapter 37 of Barnaby Rudge. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Barnaby Rudge by Charles Dickens, Chapter 37. To surround anything, however monstrous or ridiculous, with an air of mystery, is to invest it with a secret charm and power of attraction, which to the crowd is irresistible. False priests, false prophets, false doctors, false patriots, false prodigies of every kind, veiling their proceedings in mystery, have always addressed themselves at an immense advantage to the popular credulity, and have been perhaps more indebted to that resource in gaining and keeping for a time the upper hand of truth and common sense than to any half-dozen items in the whole catalogue of imposture. Curiosity is, and has been from the creation of the world, a master passion. To awaken it, to gratify it by slight degrees, and yet leave something always in suspense, is to establish the surest hold that can be had, in wrong, on the unthinking portion of mankind. If a man had stood on London Bridge, calling, till he was hoarse, upon the passers-by to join with Lord George Gordon, although for an object which no man understood, and which in that very incident had a charm of its own, the probability is that he might have influenced a score of people in a month. If all zealous Protestants had been publicly urged to join in an association for the avowed purpose of singing a hymn or two occasionally, and hearing some indifferent speeches made, and ultimately of petitioning Parliament not to pass an act for abolishing the penal laws against Roman Catholic priests, the penalty of perpetual imprisonment denounced against those who educated children in that persuasion, and the disqualification of all members of the Romish Church to inherit real property in the United Kingdom by right of purchase or descent, matters so far removed from the business and bosoms of the mass, might perhaps have called together 100 people. But when vague rumours got abroad that in this Protestant association a secret power was mustering against the government for undefined and mighty purposes, when the air was filled with whispers of a confederacy among the popish powers to degrade and enslave England, establish an inquisition in London, and turn the pens of Smithfield Market into stakes and cauldrons, when terrors and alarms which no man understood were perpetually broached, both in and out of Parliament, by one enthusiast who did not understand himself, and bygone bugbears which had lain quietly in their graves for centuries were raised again to haunt the ignorant and credulous. When all this was done, as it were, in the dark, and secret invitations to join the great Protestant association in defence of religion, life, and liberty were dropped in the public ways, thrust under the house doors, tossed in at windows, and pressed into the hands of those who trod the streets by night, when they glared from every wall and shone on every post and pillar, so that stocks and stones appeared infected with the common fear, urging all men to join together blindfold in resistance of they knew not what, they knew not why, then the mania spread indeed, and the body, still increasing every day, grew 40,000 strong. So said, at least, in this month of March, 1780, Lord George Gordon, the association's president. Whether it was the fact or otherwise, few men knew or cared to ascertain. It had never made any public demonstration, had scarcely ever been heard of save through him, had never been seen, and was supposed by many to be the mere creature of his disordered brain. He was accustomed to talk largely about numbers of men, stimulated, as it was inferred, by certain successful disturbances arising out of the same subject, which had occurred in Scotland in the previous year, was looked upon as a cracked-brained member of the lower house who attacked all parties and sided with none, and was very little regarded. It was known that there was discontent abroad. There always is. He had been accustomed to address the people by placard, speech, and pamphlet upon other questions. Nothing had come in England of his past exertions, and nothing was apprehended from his present. Just as he has come upon the reader, he had come from time to time upon the public, and been forgotten in a day. As suddenly as he appears in these pages, after a blank of 5 long years, did he and his proceedings begin to force themselves about this period upon the notice of thousands of people who had mingled in active life during the whole interval, and who, without being deaf or blind to passing events, had scarcely ever thought of him before. "My lord," said Gashford in his ear, as he drew the curtains of his bed betimes. "My lord." "Yes, who's that? What is it?" "The clock has struck 9," returned the secretary, with meekly folded hands. "You have slept well? I hope you have slept well. If my prayers are heard, you are refreshed indeed." "To say the truth, I have slept so soundly," said Lord George, rubbing his eyes and looking round the room, "that I don't remember quite—what place is this?" "My lord!" cried Gashford with a smile. "Oh," returned his superior, "yes, you're not a Jew, then." "A Jew!" exclaimed the pious secretary, recoiling. "I dreamed that we were Jews, Gashford. You and I, both of us, Jews with long beards." "Heaven forbid, my lord! We might as well be papists." "I suppose we might," returned the other very quickly. "Eh? You really think so, Gashford?" "Surely I do!" the secretary cried, with looks of great surprise. "Humph!" he muttered. "Yes, that seems reasonable." "I hope, my lord," the secretary began. "Hope!" he echoed, interrupting him. "Why do you say you hope? There's no harm in thinking of such things." "Not in dreams," returned the secretary. "In dreams, no, nor waking either." "Called and chosen and faithful," said Gashford, taking up Lord George's watch, which lay upon a chair, and seeming to read the inscription on the seal abstractedly. It was the slightest action possible, not obtruded on his notice, and apparently the result of a moment's absence of mind, not worth remark. But as the words were uttered, Lord George, who had been going on impetuously, stopped short, reddened, and was silent. Apparently quite unconscious of this change in his demeanour, the wily secretary stepped a little apart, under pretence of pulling up the window-blind, and returning when the other had had time to recover, said, "The holy cause goes bravely on, my lord. I was not idle even last night. I dropped 2 of the handbills before I went to bed, and both are gone this morning. Nobody in the house has mentioned the circumstance of finding them, though I have been downstairs full half an hour. 1 or 2 recruits will be their first fruit, I predict, and who shall say how many more, with heaven's blessing on your inspired exertions?" "It was a famous device in the beginning," replied Lord George, "an excellent device, and did good service in Scotland. It was quite worthy of you. You remind me not to be a sluggard, Gashford, when the vineyard is menaced with destruction, and may be trodden down by papist feet. Let the horses be saddled in half an hour. We must be up and doing." He said this with a heightened colour, and in a tone of such enthusiasm, that the secretary deemed all further prompting needless, and withdrew. "Dreamed he was a Jew," he said thoughtfully, as he closed the bedroom door. "He may come to that before he dies. It's like enough. Well, after a time, and provided I lost nothing by it, I don't see why that religion shouldn't suit me as well as any other. There are rich men among the Jews. Shaving is very troublesome. Yes, it would suit me well enough. For the present, though, we must be Christian to the core. Our prophetic motto will suit all creeds in their turn. That's a comfort." Reflecting on this source of consolation, he reached the sitting-room and rang the bell for breakfast. Lord George was quickly dressed, for his plain toilet was easily made, and as he was no less frugal in his repasts than in his Puritan attire, his share of the meal was soon dispatched. The secretary, however, more devoted to the good things of this world, or more intent on sustaining his strength and spirits for the sake of the Protestant cause, ate and drank to the last minute, and required indeed some 3 or 4 reminders from John Gruby before he could resolve to tear himself away from Mr. Willet's plentiful providing. At length he came downstairs, wiping his greasy mouth, and having paid John Willet's bill, climbed into his saddle. Lord George, who had been walking up and down before the house, talking to himself with earnest gestures, mounted his horse, and returning old John Willet's stately bow, as well as the parting salutation of a dozen idlers whom the rumour of a live lord being about to leave the Maypole had gathered round the porch, they rode away with stout John Gruby in the rear. If Lord George Gordon had appeared in the eyes of Mr. Willet overnight a nobleman of somewhat quaint and odd exterior, the impression was confirmed this morning, and increased 100-fold. Sitting bolt upright upon his bony steed, with his long straight hair dangling about his face and fluttering in the wind, his limbs all angular and rigid, his elbows stuck out on either side ungracefully, and his whole frame jogged and shaken at every motion of his horse's feet, a more grotesque or more ungainly figure